Ladies and gents, welcome to this week's episode of Tell Us Something We Don't Know, a serious chat with a comedian. My guest today has not only been a friend of mine for 30 years, but has become one of the world's best photographers. An Australian-based commercial and fine art photographer who perfectly captures scenes that resonate at the decisive moment. He employs the use of delicate tones, refined composition, and a precise depth to draw the viewer into his images, provoking curiosity about the scenes and the people in them. Now, I'm just going to take a minute, if I may, to go through some of the awards that he's won, just some of them, okay? So in 2009, he was awarded the AIPP Commercial Photographer of the Year. In 2013, he was honoured to be an Ilford Master. In 2014, he was the Street Photographer of the Year as well as the Victorian Travel Photographer of the Year. 2015, he won the Australian Top Travel Photographer of the Year and was a finalist for the International Travel Photographer of the Year. In 2016, he again won the Australian Top Travel Photographer of the Year. In 2017, he wins the Photographic Book of the Year, titled Urban Clarity. 2018, the WPPI honoured him as a Master Photographer, as well as releasing Volume 2 of his book, Urban Vitality. In 2019, wins the Victorian Travel Photographer of the Year. These are just some of the awards that this gentleman has won. Steve, isn't it time you step aside and stop competing, mate?
I'm sorry, I didn't know how all of that happened.
Seriously. Steve, welcome, mate. Thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
Steve and I met in 1989 in music class, right?
Yeah, when you said 30 years, it's like, wow, it really has been.
It's been 30 years, hasn't it?
Holy crap, yes.
Maybe more, okay? Yeah.
Maybe more, yeah.
So we met in music class and we're actually in a band together. So I played keyboards and Steve played the bass. And we actually did not bad, did we? We were okay. I think we won Battle of the Bands and stuff like that. This is back in Sydney.
We played Australia's Wonderland.
We did. Remember, I've got pictures, I've got pictures of that.
I love it.
So let's tell us about your story, mate. This is not about me. Let's tell us about yourself. So you're born in Sydney, right? And I always remember at school you always had a camera in your hand. Tell us how that all happened.
Yeah, so I just found photography really quite natural. Mm-hmm. So I ended up getting a camera, I think it was for my 8th birthday as a present.
Right.
And I just naturally took to it. It was
from your mum and dad? From your dad? What?
No, this particular camera was from my auntie.
Right.
Getting to a really special camera that my dad kind of gave me when I was about 12.
Yeah.
By that stage, I was right into photography. So I started photography really quite early. I could just, I don't know, it just kind of, I couldn't draw, I couldn't paint, especially at that age.
Yeah.
And make no guesses, I was a pretty bad photographer back then too. Yeah. But look, it was a joy.
I've got to say that obviously, we're pretty much the same age. So I remember being 8 or 9 years old. I don't ever remember having any fascination with a camera or any friends of mine having fascinations with cameras at that age. That's pretty unique, isn't it? Would you say?
I guess so. Looking back at it, for me, it just felt completely natural.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, it actually excited me. It actually found a bit of passion with it. Right. And I really enjoyed the whole kind of process.
So to talk to us about being an 8 or 9 year old with a camera in your hand. How did you learn? Well, obviously, there was no internet back then. Where did you learn more about the camera?
Yes. So thankfully, the good old corner news agents,
right?
They had a whole flurry of all sorts of camera magazines and that type of thing. So, I'd save up my pocket money. I wasn't working then by that stage, but when I had a part-time job, I'd save up my pennies and kind of buy a photographic book, learn about the sort of processes and that type of thing. Back then, it was all film too, so there was no kind of mention of digital.
Yeah. I remember because there was the 12 shot, the 24 shot, 36 shot, 48 shot. If you're a big shot. I remember, how rich did you feel when you dropped off the film and said, I'll have doubles?
Yeah, I know.
Remember the doubles?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I got money. I got 2 pictures.
It's like, make it rain.
And sometimes, you remember we used to put the film in the camera. If there's young people watching, we used to have the film, and this is actually, you know why I'm pretty good at what I'm saying, because this is actually a routine of mine. But anyway,
Oh, no.
sorry to hijack your guest appearance here. But you'd put the film in the camera. I don't know if you remember this. You know when you put the film in the camera and you take the picture, and then there's that little wheel on the side.
Yeah.
You'd roll it to the next shot. Do you remember if you got a roll of 24 pictures and you got to the end and you had to wind it to get to the end before you could take it out? Because if you took it out before, it would ruin the whole film, right?
Exactly, yes.
Do you ever remember getting to the 24th picture, then winding it? I got an extra picture. Do you remember you used to get 24? It was like you won lotto back in those days, remember?
It was pretty special.
Yeah. So going back to you, mate. So you're 8, 9, 10 by this stage. You know, when did you start getting really, serious into it? Because from what you told me, you had your own dark room in your bedroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
what 12-year-old has that? How did that happen?
a very passionate one.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was I ended up kind of really getting involved with photography, and film even back then wasn't that cheap. You'd drop off a roll of 12, I think I was doing back then, off to the chemist and pick it up a week later, and it's like, oh wow, I could maybe keep one of these, and it was all part of that process. Essentially, as my kind of passion grew with it, and I was also into video cameras by that stage as well, so playing a little bit around with motion and stuff like that. My father ended up giving me his camera. I did a little bit of research on it since last time we spoke, and it was purchased by him in 1952. It was a pack set, and it was basically a very run-of-the-mill sort of rangefinder camera.
Yep.
In Germany. So
Right.
he was obviously Italian.
Yeah.
And he bought it while he was doing his service and that type of thing, and then actually brought it over when he migrated in 56.
Do you remember him using it though, or was it? Did he buy and just sort of stayed, collecting data?
Yeah, exactly. Never. I never actually had ever seen this camera. It was always tucked away, kind of hidden. And the reason why, he could never actually get it to work properly.
Right.
So, because it was completely manual, you had to adjust all the settings like shutter speed, so on and so forth. He could never really get a good use out of it.
Right.
So, he just one day gave it to me, put a roll through, and that's really how I started really getting going.
And how old were you at this stage?
I was about 12.
Right. But how does a 12-year-old afford a dark room in their bedroom? What did your parents say? How'd you pay for it? Who helped you put it together? Tell us about that.
The good thing is, as you know, at our school, we didn't have kind of like a photographic course or class or anything like that. Yeah. So by this stage, I was actually working at a butcher, just cleaning up every Saturday morning.
As a 12-year-old?
Yeah, because child law labours back then were not existent.
We get away with it now. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and I remember, I think I was getting about $20 or $30 just for 4 or 5 hours back then, so that was pretty good money.
Yeah,
for a 12-year-old. The good thing was, if you purchased chemicals, they could last quite a while as well. So it was pretty frugal. I was pretty,
When you say chemicals, the chemicals to develop film.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Yes. Okay.
So initially I was only developing film because that was the easiest part. And then later I ended up purchasing an enlarger, like the old, it's almost like a kind of a lamp that shines your negative onto unexposed paper. And then you put the paper through the chemicals, and then that's how you get it all. It was all black and white. Yeah. And relatively simple process.
Yeah. It's really interesting hearing you talking about this, because I would never have imagined speaking to you about photography and thinking that you would have been into it at that early age. I mean, you look at people like Britney Spears, for example. These people don't just start singing when they're 20 years old. All of a sudden, they've got this amazing voice. And I mean, you look at her history. She's been doing it since she was 5 or 6, right?
Exactly.
And so it's no wonder you've become such an amazing photographer, given how early you started. Yeah. So, but what did your parents say? Like, you had Italian parents, right? Why don't you go clean the leaves off the gutters? What do you concrete the front, water the concrete in the front? What are you doing in your room in a dark room? What did they say about that?
Well, the good thing, was they kind of put up with it for a little bit. When I was
Yeah.
getting older and I was still interested in it,
Yeah.
my father said, it's time to get a trade.
Right.
Get a trade.
Yeah.
Don't rely on a career in photography.
Yeah.
And that was just his thought process.
Yeah.
It was just that generation.
Right.
Thankfully, I was pretty defiant.
Yeah. When did you start playing bass guitar, though?
See, I reckon that was I tried guitar, electric guitar, but that just didn't work. So I'm thinking bass guitar was around about 15.
Yeah, right.
So year 9, year 10, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Something
just,
like that.
Just before we met, because we met in year 11. Because I came
absolutely.
to Christian Brothers in year 11. So where do you go from there? Right, so you got this keen interest in photography. What did you do after school? Because we kind of I went to uni. What did you do after school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did get a trade. I was a forklift truck driver for only a few years.
Yeah.
But at that same time, I went straight into study with photography.
Yeah, because it's hard to imagine you doing that, knowing how creative you are. And you hear, we did music and we did okay out of it in terms of, not money, but I'm saying, we were like, we were playing Battle of the Bands and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, we kept the beat.
Yeah, we kept the beat. That you would have had this itching inside you, wouldn't you, to explore that creative side. That's what I'm really interested to know more about.
Absolutely. So the strange thing was I'd never felt like I was actually creative back then.
Right.
Even back then when I was photographing.
Yeah.
I felt like I'm a far more technical photographer than I am the kind of using photography as an art form to express myself.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it was the actual process of creating, not necessarily creating the art, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Let's fast forward because there's a lot of interesting stuff that we're going to talk about today. So what do you do from there? How do you get to where you are now? Give us a sort of a 30,000 foot view of how you got to where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back now, I've actually changed my career 3 times over the last 30 years or so. So the first 10 years directly after school and into my 20s, I was initially working at a couple of camera photographic labs.
Yeah.
So yet again, this was way before digital, or perhaps a good 10 years before digital.
Sure.
So everything was getting processed via film, slide transparency, like E6 process. And I slowly worked my way up and ended up managing a commercial lab in Sydney.
Right.
So that was kind of looking after other photographers and that type of thing, processing their work, kind of getting it back out. So that was kind of my high 20s. Mm-hmm. At that stage, though, I started photographing weddings, not for myself, but for other assistants and, assisting and getting into that sort of realm. Nothing ever that I really enjoyed about photographing weddings, except really sharing somebody's moment. Yeah, essentially.
Because you would have got over 120 weddings a year at one stage, right?
Yeah, in the end, absolutely. Yeah. So in my next phase of my career, I ended up purchasing a wedding studio up in Newcastle, New South Wales. Yeah. And I built that over the 12 years that I actually had it to well over 120 weddings a year, a couple of full-time staff, and maybe about 3 or 4 different contractors over that time as well. Yeah. Yeah. So I was very busy. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Right. And we're both Sydney boys, but we've both ended up living in Melbourne. Why did you move to Melbourne? Because at one stage you wanted to go to Seattle, right?
Correct. Yes. So essentially, whilst kind of building my dream in terms of photographing weddings and kind of really running a big studio and stuff like that, I was burning out essentially. So I was doing about 80 to 100 hours a week. If anybody out there ever has run their own business, it is flat chat and it never ends. So by that stage, and of course being a wedding photographer, I lost all my friends due to me being at work all the time.
Yeah, of course, because most of them are on the weekends, right?
Absolutely. Saturdays, Sundays, Fridays.
Yeah.
So essentially, I started to think about the future. And this was around about 2008, around about 2009. So the beautiful thing about this was, it's like, okay, I'm going to start planning on retiring from wedding photography. And by that stage, I just started going overseas. And I visited Seattle and just immediately fell in love with it.
It's an interesting city, isn't it? What did you like about Seattle?
It really is. A few people have asked me that over the years, and you know what? I can't answer it. I don't know. There was just something about it that it was the kind of threaded culture that is somewhat evident there. That the people were absolutely amazing. The views, the weather. It was just really, something spoke to me about it. And that's essentially where I was headed. What happened and what ended up stopping that for me was, by that stage, the GFC, so the global financial crisis.
Yep.
We didn't really get affected by it here, at least financially, but the confidence went out within business, especially the wedding industry and stuff like that, because everybody was uncertain.
Yes.
It was kind of like a financial sort of pandemic back then. We didn't know whether it was going to come and hit over here and things like that. So I think it was too much of a risk for me to kind of hop off and just go over to the States when literally they were starting to spiral down into turmoil. Yeah. In hindsight, they did recover really quite well, but obviously didn't know that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you started off. You were a commercial photographer of the year in 2009, which is round about the time that you moved to Melbourne, right? Somewhere around there.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
But how do you go from being a commercial photographer to 3 or 4 years later being the travel photographer of the year? And why? Tell us why you're a successful commercial photographer in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So the photos that I actually ended up winning with the 2009 Commercial Photographer of the Year were actually of brides. So by that stage, I shot for Australian Vogue. Yes, it was. And I submitted some of those images from the editorial into this competition.
Right.
AIPP stands for the Australian Institute of Professional Photography. Yeah. So it's kind of like our sort of institution. Yeah. And it's kind of like our Logies. Yeah. Put it that way.
Yeah. And does everyone get smashed as well at the party?
Well, yeah, used to. Pre-COVID, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Because I was kind of head down, bum up throughout the years in my own business, I never really kind of saw many other examples of what other photographers were doing. Sure, I'd kind of keep ahead of trends and things like that. However, I think a lot has to do with my success is stop looking at other photographers and seeing what they're doing, but then allow yourself to develop your own style, your own look. And then, of course, that's when you start to, I guess, become a trendsetter and kind of go at it that way.
So what is your style? Tell us about that. That's what's made you successful and stand out from other photographers?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very clean, geometric type of style. And it's very kind of common now. And common's not the right word, but it's more kind of seen now. Yeah. But back then, only in like 2015 or 14, thereabouts, it was relatively new. And I developed that because after I did end up closing the wedding business, I ended up traveling for at least a good year, going back and forth, not only from the States, but from Europe as well. Right. So the beautiful part of that is I had no kind of briefs that I had to follow for my clients or work. Yep. I was just walking the streets and just kind of photographing what was in front of me. Yeah. And from there, I developed that kind of style.
Right. And why do you think, okay, so here you are, you were doing commercial photography, then you've gone travelling and you would have just been taking pictures for your own self, I'm assuming. There would have been fantastic travel photographers already, right?
Yes.
Why do you think that, or what is it that you have that has overtaken them? How do you go from being a great commercial photographer to being winning the Victorian photographer, an Australian photographer, or making the shortlist for the International Travel Photographer of the Year? Why do you think that happened?
Yeah, so I'm thinking, if you think about what a travel photographer would be, it would kind of be like a National Geographic photographer walking or, hiking in the Amazon, taking photographs of primitive tribes, that type of feel. That's one part of travel photography. Another part is perhaps going to resorts, let's say in Fiji or the Bahamas, taking photographs of resort lifestyle and things like that. That's another version. What I was doing was actually really honing in on urban landscape. So urban buildings, the streets, and actually making them look and feel quite polished. Not the dirty, dingy streets that some may think. Like let's say, for example, in downtown LA, there's some really seedy kind of streets down and around in there. However, there's some really beautiful streets and some amazing architecture in there as well. So I was honing and kind of working towards making that kind of beautiful.
So basically, that geometric, clean, urban sort of landscape photography that you were doing, which had gotten you the prize of the Commercial Photographer of the Year, you sort of applied those techniques, but to travel. Am I right
Correct.
in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It didn't actually happen overnight. It was a development.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, your first award was in 2009, and then your first travel photography award was in 2014, I believe, right?
Correct.
And then you won a whole lot of, every year you were winning awards. How did that change your career and your life?
Well, I found out early on that winning awards doesn't necessarily gain more work. Especially in the wedding industry, because immediately what people thought was that you were way too out of budget or way too expensive, and then not even bother inquiring about it. So it was always a double-edged sword. The beautiful thing and the synergy that I have with my career at the moment, kind of moving a little bit forward now, living in Melbourne, is that I've attracted a lot of architectural clients and like a lot of shop fitters and that type of thing from my street photography, because they wanted that type of style already present in my own personal work.
Yeah.
And so in a roundabout way, that has given me even more play, because they're essentially choosing me purely because they're enjoying the personal work that I do.
Right.
And not normally the other way around.
Yeah. And you've gone on to teaching and also judging photography. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I really wanted to challenge myself with, and this actually, I started teaching in 2009. So that was a big year of change. I think I was frustrated with a lot of things at that stage. So one thing that I really wanted to push myself off into my kind of outer comfort zone was to actually publicly speak more and teach and really kind of pass on my knowledge by that stage to other students. So I started very small, teaching TAFE, and I still do it today. So I only teach a day, maybe 2 days a week if they need me. So it's all very part-time, but I still get such a kick out of teaching people.
Yeah.
And just watching the satisfaction that they grow.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. I know, look, I know I've spoken to you about it, and you taught me one thing, and that really changed the way that I take. I mean, not that I just use my iPhone, right? And we'll get to that a little bit later. But one thing that you taught me about was composition, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about composition in a minute.
Yeah.
And I found that when I was going overseas on my own or with a friend of mine at sort of similar age, and we'd sort of hurry through a city and we'd take pictures, that afforded me to take one kind of picture. But in 2019, I went with my parents to Italy, and my mum had a bit of a sore knee, and so I would walk ahead and I'd have to wait for her to catch up, which afforded me the time to actually, whatever subject that I was taking a picture of, to get it aligned perfectly. And you had taught me that. Then I started putting these pictures on Instagram on the stories, and the amount of people that I had complimenting the pictures, like, man, what camera are you using? I'm just using an iPhone. You know, like, hey, are you going to release a book, like one of those coffee table books of all your pictures? And I started to get this following just for my pictures. And it was because of one thing that you taught me. So thank you, Steve. And so I can imagine, you know, like how much satisfaction that must give you, you know, teaching photography. Okay, so if we've got any budding amateur photographers or people who are, you know, consider themselves professional here, let's hear it from the master. Okay, what makes a good picture?
Well, that is almost a how long is a piece of string kind of question. But if really the main point of a photograph is it's to be able to share without words something that you want to say and that can be easily understood to anybody that views it. That wasn't actually there.
Right.
So, I mean, it could be as simple as a family photo.
Yep.
Now, well, I will get into the technical parts of it all.
Yeah, please
but
do.
It should also attach an emotion to it as well. Mm-hmm. So it could be laughter, could be sadness or sorrow. It all depends.
Right.
So it's the emotion of what you're trying to say.
Right. Okay.
It's almost like a poem, but without words.
Yep. Okay. That's a poignant way of describing it. And technically, you know, the lighting and composition, equipment. You know, tell us more about that.
So if you have had experience, even with your camera phones, where you take photos and for the life of you can't get a good shot, then it's almost always the light. So a really good, starting at the very basics, the really good rule of thumb is if you're in a park, for example, choose either a fully lit area or a fully shaded area and not a combination of both. So your cameras any camera can't actually see the really bright highlights and the really dark shadows all at once. So, and this also means what you see past the people you're photographing as well. So if everybody that you're taking a photo of is in shade, but if you look past them and everything's really bright, then they're going to come out like a cutout, like a silhouette. So the best thing to do is kind of spin around and find the right light first before you think that you've got the right background.
Well, why is it that I find that if I take pictures fairly early in the morning or late in the afternoon from a sunny day, why do those pictures turn out better?
They turn out better because the sun is actually cutting through our atmosphere and it's kind of diffusing the light. So it's like putting on really nice sheer curtains over your window, and it just softens the light really nice, as well as giving it a nice golden hue.
Right.
Yeah, so instead of photographing at midday where the sunlight makes you kind of look like a raccoon.
Sure.
You're keeping it during, and there's a photography term for it. It's called the golden hour. So that's usually an hour after the sun sets or an hour before the sun rises.
Okay, that's great.
Usually a really soft, perfect time to photograph.
Yeah. Now talk about composition a little bit. This one was very interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of composition, I ended up developing a talk using Gestalt theory in terms of how composition is actually dealt with. And really in its simplest form is we live in a 3D world, and all we're doing when taking a photo or drawing or painting or taking a video, what we're doing is squeezing this whole 3D realm into a 2D object or a 2D plane. So and that plane actually has barriers. So this Gestalt theory, or the process of simplicity, all it's saying is if you see really complex objects in the world around you, just think of them as super simple shapes and then rearrange those shapes like you were just doodling it on a pad or just drawing it. So, for example, if you're in front of a person's house.
Yep.
And they have a nice, beautiful, lush green ledge.
Yes.
For their front fence.
Yep. A hedge.
And
Like yep. Yep.
Yeah, and you look past that.
Yep.
And you have a nice gable, so you've got the kind of slanted roof, as well as some red on the door or something like that. And of course, the green is actually happening on the hedge.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking that that hedge is thousands or hundreds of thousands of tiny little leaves and twigs and branches, all you need to do is start thinking about the entire shape as a whole, which is a rectangle.
Rectangle, right? Yep.
And likewise with the shape of the actual house, you just think of the top of it as a triangle, and you're really simplifying super simple shapes, and then that way it makes it easy to kind of move everything around within your frame. It also makes you really conscious of it as well.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying is just sort of to move these shapes around, so you get a feel of what. Like one thing that you taught me is like if you're going to take a picture of something like a laneway, which sort of goes in like that, sort of the point right at the end, sort of make that right in the middle of your frame, right? So it looks like it's going right into the middle, or if it's going to skew to the side, make sure you've got something that sort of evens it out on the left or the right.
Absolutely. And that can actually be built on. So once you're seeing all these really complex shapes simplified into really simple shapes, you can then start identifying what's called leading lines, which is what that perspective is down to the center point.
Yeah.
And then you can move all those sort of little areas. The trick is to actually slow down and kind of have a look at your surrounding instead of trying to capture absolutely everything that you see.
And that's what you taught me, and that's what I did. And I had no choice but to slow down, waiting for my mum to catch up. And it gave me that time to get it in perspective. And it was just instant. Like pre that trip, taking pictures, no one said anything. After that, I could have started a career. I reckon I could have given you a run for your money, right? You would have gone to the travel photographer of the year award, and you would have seen me there. I'm telling you, that's how much it changed my photos.
The problem is there's no funny photographer of the year.
And what else, Steve? So we've talked about lighting, we talked about composition. What about your equipment? Obviously, people taking pictures from an iPhone, and I want to talk about that because that's changed a lot of things. But in terms of being a professional photographer, the equipment, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I am probably not a good advocate for that because I am a gear junkie. I love spending, as soon as new technology comes out, I'm an early adopter. I'm into it, and I love it. Mm-hmm. The argument to that is you don't need to be. Mm-hmm. You actually don't need to be at all. You can get amazing photography done just on the amazing smartphones that are available now. Yeah. No matter what you own, the technology has surpassed anything that was available 15 years ago.
Yeah. So when you do you still take pictures on film, or is it all digital these days?
If I do feel nostalgic, and it's rare that I do, I will put a roll of film through. I've got a roll of film in my camera at the moment that I started in January, and it still hasn't finished.
Right.
So I don't use it. I don't photograph commercially with film anymore. Yep. For me, it's not viable, and I'm not necessarily nostalgic about it. Yeah.
So why would somebody take pictures using film these days versus digital? What distinction is there?
Well, I would kind of compare it to the craze it's not a craze, but kind of the movement of going back to vinyl records.
Right.
So something a little bit more analog. Mm-hmm. So people that perhaps never grew up with film, that only grew up with kind of digital, are feeling a little bit more nostalgic and want to experience that whole kind of experimental phase. And that's what film photography is treated as now. Right. A little bit more artistic, a little bit more experimental.
Yeah.
Because the whole process is very slow.
But talking about that, going back to vinyl, people do feel that there is a difference listening to music through vinyl. So do we see a difference using film versus digital? If we were
Without,
yeah.
yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, if I took a digital camera on one shoulder, old school camera on another shoulder, and took one picture, one camera, and from another camera of the same subject,
Yeah.
what am I going to see that's different?
Yet again, it's very similar to how digital sound and analog sound works. The digital sound, you can emulate a needle scratching across a record and then put it on any sort of CD tune or anything like that. It's not actually going to feel or sound like it actually having a needle go across vinyl. So it's exactly the same feeling that you do that is seen in photography, because photography and film is actually crystals that have been kind of baked in with silver and have been kind of solidified in a really hard jelly. So everything about it is actually crystal. It's crystallized. It's actually an organic material. You can't emulate that in digital. You can put a filter on and make it look like that, but film has a depth to it that you can look into it and through it.
Right.
And it does have to be experienced.
So how has digital then changed the photographic landscape for photographers, for professional photographers like yourself? I mean, I know everyone uses it on their phone, so for us, and the kids these days have grown up on their phone, so they don't really know any different. But how's it affected you?
I actually think it's given me more opportunity. For example, I shoot a lot of drone work for architecture nowadays.
Yeah.
Back in the day, before drones, and this is not only for digital photography but new technology, I would have to maybe spend $600 or $700 an hour hiring a helicopter, going up and photographing that.
Sure.
Now it's a beautiful add-on sale for my clients, and it's very convenient for them as well. So the technology has vastly changed the industry, but I actually think for the better.
Yeah. And what about how has it affected photographers in general in terms of, once upon a time I have to hire a professional photographer. Now I might think twice if I've got someone who's semi-decent, on an iPhone. It's taking away work, right? But what is it creating by doing that? By having these cameras in the hands of virtually everybody these days? What's your take on that?
Yeah, the beautiful thing is I'm feeling pretty comfortable that I'm not going to be pushed aside, and even now, actually more than ever, people need content, especially in terms of Instagram, and not only still, but video as well. And they do try it. I have many clients now that have come to me saying, look, I've got to admit, we've tried it ourselves. It didn't work. Why don't they look the same? And it's because you don't have the experience, you don't have the know-how. And of course you can learn that, but that kind of takes away from their own business and their own ambitions and things like that. And so then that's why you hire a professional. Because there is a whole lot. It isn't really just as, pointing a camera to something, clicking the button, and then everything's good.
Yeah. And further to this, where are we going? Where are we heading with photography these days? What's next?
Yes, I think they're really exciting times. More than ever, photography and video are needed more than ever before. I think that technology is going to evolve to more augmented reality and virtual reality.
Right.
We're already seeing some of that, but at the moment, it's kind of like 3D glasses on televisions. It was a bit of a gimmick.
Yeah.
But that's slowly actually going to kind of worm its way in to everyday every parts of our life. I
So
think.
what do you mean by augmented reality? We know what virtual reality means. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. IKEA is a really good example where they do now have an app where where you can actually choose a product and point your phone at the place where you would like it well before you purchased it, and it will place itself into your room so that you can actually check out whether it suits the rest of your decor and things like that. So that's a really positive step in terms of product sales, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
And IKEA are kind of leading the way in that at this stage.
I've seen it done with homes, with, people building high-end homes, and before the home is actually built, you can take a virtual tour. So is that's not is that a virtual tour, or is that an augmented tour of what your house is going to look like? What's the difference?
I would say, and I'm not a true expert on it, but I would say augmented reality means that it's something that doesn't actually exist yet. And a virtual tour is perhaps something that does exist, but you've taken it with three-dimensional cameras,
Right.
and that you could walk through later, kind of like Google Street.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Look, man, I'm very conscious of time. Before we go, I've still got a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Have you got a favourite camera that you use? And do you keep all your cameras?
I do. I actually keep most of them. The workhorses I kind of sell off.
Yeah.
But I ashamedly have probably well into the almost 30 cameras.
Right.
Most don't work. So that's kind of why I keep them. But yeah, they're kind of tucked away in a couple of shelves, on display, of course.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of nostalgic for that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will be thinking, what I'm about to say. Did you keep your dad's camera that he gave you when you were 12?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
yeah.
right,
So that is still pride of place.
Yeah.
That is probably the oldest thing that I actually own.
Yeah, right. Okay. Steve, who do you think is a great photographer? Who do you look up to? Or who's one of the world's best photographers in your eyes?
Yeah, things change for me. I don't necessarily look at photographers much anymore.
Right.
Because I do have a really active passion about not only directing but motion.
Yeah.
I would actually have to say cinematic directors like Stanley Kubrick, Wes Anderson. Their visions are far more inspiring than perhaps photographers that are at least current.
Yeah, right. So what does Stanley Kubrick do that you've taken that you thought, okay, let me apply that to my photography, for example?
Yeah, well, just the way that he got his director of photography to kind of compose shots,
Right.
To create tension within a scene.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of The Shining, for example, just really kind of unusual shots. Barry Lindbergh, the use of the fastest lens essentially that was ever made. So most of those scenes were actually lit just by candlelight.
Right.
Without any kind of
Professional lighting
kind of
rings. Yeah.
lighting at all.
Yeah.
So just really innovative and just working the camera and his art to the best of his ability.
Yeah.
Like Wes Anderson, for example, the color palettes that he uses and the composition is incredible. Like the Budapest Hotel, for example.
Yeah.
Movies like that, really incredible.
So you'd suggest for young up and coming photographers to look at film directors?
Yes, absolutely.
And how they see things.
Yeah, a lot of great television as well, especially American television, is beautifully lit. NCIS, for example, and I don't get into the kind of whole cop show scene, but just the way they're lit is mastery. Americans really do that really well. Yeah, right. So if you want to learn lighting, definitely, I think it was NCIS LA or one of those. It might have been the New York one.
Yeah.
The lighting was incredible.
I'll ask my wife. She loves watching those kind of shows.
Oh, cool.
Steve, what's next for you? What's next for Steve Scalone?
Yes, I'm slowly edging in towards manufacturing now. So
Manufacturing of
wallpaper, wall decals, prints, that type of thing.
Yep.
So I am switching a little bit more online at this stage, and really enjoying that whole process. I'm a mad fan of logistics.
Yeah.
So I like getting all my systems in place and that type of thing. So, I can churn out a product if I needed to, within 20 minutes or so. And I love that type of stuff.
Right. And I've got one more question which I ask everybody who appears as a guest on my podcast. But before I do, where can people find you? Scalone.com. Steve,
yes.
With a once I had to sign a DVD for someone, and I said, "Oh, what's your name?" He goes, "Stephen." I said, "Is that with a V or a PH?" And he goes, "It's with an S." That always stood out to me. So Steve, Steve, Scalone, Scalone.com. Where can we find you on Instagram?
Yes, Scalone _ photo will get you there.
Yep. Okay, great. Last question, Steve, before we go. What do you do to live your best life?
Slow down. Mm-hmm. Yeah, simplify things. Especially with some health challenges and that type of thing lately.
Yeah.
Definitely appreciating the smaller things or the simpler things in life is, I think, the best way. I think that's the future.
Yeah. Okay. Steve Scalone, thank you very much, mate. It's been a pleasure. I actually learnt a few little tricks today.
Good-o.
Mate, I might see you at one of these awards. Steve Scalone, thanks very much, mate.
Thank you. A pleasure, mate.
Great.